Venezuela. How about we're buying oil from Venezuela? When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door. But now we're buying oil from Venezuela, so we're making a dictator very rich. Can you believe this?
Why is running a country in South America America first?
Well, I think it is because we want to surround ourselves with good neighbors. We want to surround ourselves with stability. We want to surround ourselves with energy. We have tremendous energy in that country. It's very important that we protect it. We need that for ourselves. We need that for the world. And we want to make sure we can protect it.
Siempre lo han hecho, pero jamás ningún gobierno anterior desde que la CIA existe dijo públicamente que mandaba a la CIA a matar, a derrocar y a acabar a los países.
I think President Trump believes that Nicolas Maduro is an illegitimate president leading an illegitimate regime.
Yo solamente digo, nuestro pueblo está claro, está unido, está muy consciente, tiene millones de ojos y millones de oídos y tiene la forma para que nosotros volvamos a derrotar esta conspiración abierta contra la paz y la estabilidad de Venezuela y ganemos la paz y la estabilidad a la cual tiene derecho el pueblo de Venezuela. De esta burda y grosera política intervencionista para cambio de régimen.
Es muy grande la causa que defendemos. Así que el cambio de régimen, además de ilegal, es inmoral. Y aquí no lograrán ni colonizar, ni esclavizar, ni a Venezuela, ni a América del Sur, ni a nuestra América. Y si algún día tocan a Venezuela, toda la América se levantará por nosotros, por el pueblo de Bolívar.
Because this guy is about to make us a lot of money. If you don't know, this is the president of Venezuela, and he's basically a dictator. But Venezuela has the most and raw US oil that hasn't been touched in the entire globe. So last night, we're all sleeping. US goes in, strikes Venezuela, helicopters, choppers, boom, 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 boom. They sweep in Delta Force. This is literally what happened. Delta Force goes in. Maduro's sleeping. Goddamn Paw Patrol and Delta Force comes in, snatches him and his wife. Maduro's like, where's my security? They're all gone. They're gone. All right? They're gone. They put him on a chopper. They take him out right off the coast to a boat. They're on their way to New York right now. They're probably there. But how are we gonna make money? Trump's like, guys, Venezuela's ours. They stole our oil. All their oil, they stole it from us. They put it there. They stole it from us. So what we're gonna do, I know you're worried about what's gonna happen, but don't worry. We're gonna have our large oil companies go in to Venezuela. And by the way, the US is going to control it until we can get a regime change. It's ours now. Now, you might not like that, but it is what it is. So this is the stock market. Exxon, 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 Exxon.
And early today, at my direction, the United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela. Overwhelming American military power, air, land, and sea, was used to launch a spectacular assault. And it was an assault like people have not seen since World War II. It was a force against a heavily fortified military fortress in the heart of Caracas to bring outlaw dictator Nicolas Maduro to justice. This was one of the most stunning, effective, and powerful displays of American military might and competence in American history. And if you think about it, we've done some other good ones like the attack on Soleimani, the attack on al-Baghdadi, and the obliteration and decimation of the Iran nuclear sites just recently. in an operation known as Midnight Hammer. All perfectly executed and done. No nation in the world could achieve what America achieved yesterday, or frankly, in just a short period of time. All Venezuelan military capacities were rendered powerless as the men and women of our military, working with U.S. law enforcement, successfully captured Maduro in the dead of night. It was dark. The lights of Caracas were largely turned off due to a certain expertise that we have. It was dark and it was deadly. But captured along with his wife, Celia Flores, both of whom now face American justice. Maduro and Flores have been indicted in the Southern District of New York, it's Jay Clayton, for their campaign of deadly narco-terrorism against the United States and its citizens. I want to thank the men and women of our military who achieved such an extraordinary success overnight with breathtaking speed, power, precision, and competence. You rarely see anything like it. You've seen some raids in this country that didn't go so well. They were an embarrassment. If you look back to Afghanistan, or if you look back to the Jimmy Carter days, they were different days. We're a respected country again, like never before. These highly trained warriors operating in collaboration with U.S. law enforcement caught them in a very ready position. They were
war. And while the art of war is best known for, well, actual warfare, many of its lessons have been applied to negotiations, diplomacy, and politics in general. Now, what if I told you that the US military buildup off the coast of Venezuela is an implementation of this very lesson, a strategic performance of strength at a time when much of the world perceives the US to be in decline? With the rise of China on the global stage, the failure of NATO to defeat Russia in Ukraine, the inability to destroy the Islamic Revolution in Iran, the challenge of defeating Hamas in the besieged Gaza Strip, and the rapid inflation of the dollar, the American empire has never appeared weaker. Regardless of the fact that most of its military strength remains intact, and that its GDP is still the highest in the world, the perception held by many is that the US is an empire in decline, and that its fall is only a matter of time. And this perception isn't just felt internationally, it's felt domestically by Americans as well. This overall feeling of decline is what led to the election of Donald Trump, who ran on a very simple message: make America great again. The message itself implies that America is no longer great, and the people desperately want it to be so.
We will take back our country and we will make America great again.
Ever since Trump's re-election a year ago, the US has been desperately trying to reassert itself all around the world. In his first 6 months in office, Trump joined Israel in bombing Iran, escalated tensions with Russia by continuing to arm Ukraine, sanctioned half of the planet, threatened to annex both Canada and Greenland, and renamed the Department of Defense to the War Department. All of this is connected to Trump's campaign promise to make America great again. But this is more than just propaganda for a domestic audience of idiot plebs. It's also an attempt to remind the world who's actually in charge. In its latest effort to flex its strength, the US has set its sights on its South American enemy, Venezuela. The US has amassed a massive naval fleet off Venezuela's coast and has implemented a no-fly zone over the country. All things point towards a major US attack on the country. So the question currently on everyone's mind, is Trump actually serious about going to war with Venezuela? In this video, we will explore the US regime change plans for Venezuela and reveal what's at stake for the American empire. Because this isn't just another regime change operation by the United States. This is do or die for the American empire. Because the US finds itself in a rapidly evolving global economic system that it created but has already started leaving it behind. So this isn't business as usual for the military-industrial complex or the Pentagon. This is an operation that could determine the next world superpower for the next century. Whenever the US prepares for war or regime change, whether it's Iraq, Libya, Iran, and now Venezuela, the first strikes are always in the information space. The articles come before the airstrikes. Headlines propagandize the public, frame the narrative, and manufacture consent for whatever follows. To accurately predict which way things are going, I like to expose myself to all the propaganda. I've learned to read between the lines and see the intent behind the article. This is how I was. To understand why the US is now threatening war with Venezuela, we first need to explore some basic history. Venezuela is a very unique country in South America. It carries the legacy of Simon Bolivar, the revolutionary who fought to liberate Latin America from European colonial rule. Bolivar did not just want independence for Venezuela. He wanted a united, sovereign South American continent, one strong enough to resist outside empires. That vision alone put Venezuela in ideological conflict with the United States, which has long viewed the Western Hemisphere as its sphere of influence under the Monroe Doctrine, a policy that essentially states this half of the planet belongs to us. Now, combine that historical and political legacy with Venezuela's vast amount of natural resources. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Iraq, more than the United States. We are talking about at least $18 trillion in underground wealth, and that is just their oil. This does not include their gas, gold, iron, or other natural resources that are mostly untapped. For most of the 20th century, Venezuelan oil was controlled by a small elite aligned with US corporations and Western interests. The profits flowed upward into foreign banks and private pockets, while the majority of Venezuelans remained in poverty. In the 1970s, Arab states imposed an oil embargo in response to Israel's aggression against Egypt. This triggered a global oil shortage that sent prices skyrocketing. The Venezuelan elite benefited tremendously from this crisis, but it wouldn't last long. The sudden rise in oil prices pushed major economies into a recession, which forced many of these countries to seek alternative energy sources. This shift led to what is known as the oil glut of the 1980s, where global oil supply far exceeded the demand, causing prices to collapse to record lows. Because the vast majority of Venezuela's national revenue came from these oil exports, and because most of these profits flowed into the hands of a collaborating elite, the country was completely unprepared for the fallout of the oil price crash.
Venezuela, hyperinflation has reached such proportions that people are dropping wads of devalued bills off trucks. Bolivar has become so cheap that it is more profitable to use it instead of toilet paper. Inflation, which began in the 2010s due to economic instability and falling oil prices, led to price hikes and currency depreciation. Residents began to find uses for the money in everyday life for the most unexpected needs. In Venezuela,
why Venezuela's money became worthless. Venezuela, known for having the world's largest oil reserves, is a land rich in minerals and stunning natural beauty. But imagine a scenario where, despite such riches, the money in your pocket loses its value daily. This is what happened with Venezuela's hyperinflation episode between 2017 and 2020, when prices soared uncontrollably, causing the nation's currency to become nearly worthless. At its peak in 2018, the inflation rate in Venezuela skyrocketed to an astonishing 1,698,488%. To visualize this, imagine the Bolivar losing 90% of its value in a few weeks. But this crisis isn't just about big numbers. It's the result of poor economic decisions, an overwhelming dependence on oil, and unchecked money printing. It really feels like a cautionary tale.
Enormous profits from oil exports in the 1970s convinced the political elite that Venezuela could take on massive loans without consequence. The assumption being that the oil revenue would always be there to pay them back. But when oil prices collapsed in the 1980s, the Venezuelan government found itself in a predicament. They were now facing a severe budget deficit, runaway inflation, and a rapidly accelerating debt spiral where new loans had to be taken to pay off the old loans. At the time, Venezuela had international reserves of $300 million and a debt of $34 billion, with a poverty rate of 70%. It was a complete shit show. The Venezuelan government was trapped between the need to modernize their economy and pull their people out of poverty, while also addressing the debt crisis before it could further spiral out of control. International lenders like the IMF and World Bank offered to step in with even more loans, but on the condition that the government liberalize the economy and implement austerity measures. Simply put, austerity is when governments slash spending by reducing or outright cutting budgets for public services and subsidies. This is done either to balance the budget or to pay off the interest-bearing loans owed to institutions like the IMF or World Bank. But austerity isn't just cutting public spending. Sometimes, in order to appease the banks that now effectively own the economy, nations are required to liberalize the economy, or in other words, give up state control of key aspects of industry and hand them over to private corporations, usually with Western ownership and investment. Venezuela's president at the time, Carlos Andrés Perez, won his second term by campaigning against austerity, promising to protect social programs and maintain subsidies. But once in office, he reversed course and implemented the very austerity measures he had condemned. Entire sectors of the economy were privatized. So the United States has spent the last 2 decades trying to overthrow the government of Venezuela. Now, while it's true that the United States wants to look strong in the face of perceived weakness, this aggression towards Venezuela isn't just performative propaganda. The real reason Washington has now rapidly accelerated its regime change plans for Venezuela is because the global economic order is shifting fast. For the last 80 years, the United States has dominated the world through 2 main pillars: the dollar and control of global energy, primarily oil and gas. These 2 things are inseparable. You see, the dollar is strong because oil has exclusively been priced and traded in dollars globally. This is known as the petrodollar system. But that system has slowly been unraveling over the last few years. Countries like China, Russia, Iran, Brazil, South Africa, basically the BRICS nations, are actively building an alternative global financial system, one that does not rely on the US dollar in order to trade for commodities like oil and gas. China has already been signing oil trade deals in their own currency, the yuan. For example, just a few months ago in September, Saudi Arabia and China settled an oil transaction in the digital yuan. Even India has been purchasing Russian oil despite the sanctions using the Chinese yuan. To many, this is the beginning of the end of the dollar's hegemony. So the United States now has one urgent strategic priority: re-establish control over the world's largest remaining oil reserves in order to prevent more sales in non-dollar currencies. Those reserves are, guess where? Iran and Venezuela. Trillions of dollars of oil, enough to determine the future of global energy pricing, determine the world's reserve currency, and control over the Chinese economy, sits under governments that are not aligned with Washington. Even worse, Venezuela has been strengthening economic ties with China, Russia, and Iran, the 3 main challengers to US hegemony. Beijing has already invested heavily in Venezuelan infrastructure and oil extraction operations to the tune of $67 billion. Russia provides military equipment and intelligence support, and Iran advises Venezuela on how to bypass sanctions and protect against refinery sabotage. So from the perspective of the US national security establishment, Venezuela had crossed from disobedient to strategically dangerous, and time was quickly running out to prevent them from joining BRICS. Because if Venezuela, China, and the entire BRICS bloc began to finalize oil trade outside of the dollar system, it would have undermined the petrodollar, weakened US global financial power, accelerated the shift toward a multipolar world, and removed the economic basis of the US empire itself. So again, this is not about democracy, corruption, or even drug trafficking. This is about preventing global power from changing hands. So when the US positions its navy outside Venezuela today, it's not simply flexing for its domestic audience of idiot plebs. It is defending the core operating system of the American empire. Whoever controls Venezuelan oil in the next decade will have leverage in this new global economic order that is rapidly taking shape.